So in this video, I'm going to be sharing my thoughts as to why I think society has never been child-centred. I have got a video on exploring what child-centred means, especially in society, and how that can look. So if you do want to go and check that out, please feel free to. But this one, I'm just sharing my thoughts as to why I don't think we ever have been. So this is all my own observations and pure opinions. I haven't seen this anywhere, I don't think. I just randomly thought this out a little bit, and I just thought, you know what? I'm going to share it online, see what people think, see people's opinions, and just open up that conversation. The reason why I think we've never been child-centred in society is simply down to the patriarchy. The world we live in was never designed with children at the centre of a healthy, thriving society, and that's not an accident. So just bear with me on this, okay? Because I was just randomly thinking about this the other day, and I just clocked onto it, and then I just thought, let me share this online and see what people say. So here we are. So I think it's important to understand and acknowledge that historically, under the patriarchy, children were never seen as full human beings. They were seen as property or assets and tools for men to carry on their legacy and continue on their name and also secure his wealth. Children were seen as property to men because women were already seen as property to men, a commodity, if you will. The patriarchy centres men, their needs, their power, their progress, and women, wives and children were basically just seen as accessories to that. It's also important to understand that in many early matrilineal or matrifocal communities that children belonged to the community or clan. Identity was passed on through the mother because you could guarantee maternity. So it was very easy to trace down a lineage and be like, okay, this is your mother, this is your grandmother, that's just how it's always been, okay? You don't trace the family line through a man because the man could have come from anywhere. Since paternity was never guaranteed, men decided to create a system to guarantee the paternity, and they started to view ownership as something that they were entitled to. And the only way they could guarantee a child was theirs was to create a system, some sort of exclusive nuclear unit of ownership that would say, this is mine and I can guarantee it. So what is the one way you can guarantee paternity and ownership of a child is to create a system that forces women to survive on the man and be forced to reproduce. And to enforce this rise in patriarchy and this logic of ownership and carrying on your lineage and name and wealth was they had to control women's sexuality and reproduction. Matrilineal and matrifocal communities placed children at the centre of social life. They were seen as community wealth and not individual wealth, whereas the patriarchy completely flipped this. Instead of seeing children as communal wealth, they were seen as private assets. So to put it short, children became property because women were property first, and in the process of all this happening, the natural place of a child being at the centre of society was stripped away. It's also really important to note that because women were then forced to rely on men for survival, this meant that a lot of men got unquestionable access to children. They basically had the entitlement to have children. So basically, this just meant women had no choice but to reproduce. So a lot of children, a lot of people were born out of forced reproduction. That's how I see it anyway, because if you really think about it, if women were forced to rely on men for survival and then therefore they did not get any choice in whether they should have children or not, because it was shamed, it was put down to being bad if you did not reproduce. Do you really think if women had the choice, they would have had this many people and we would be having so many people on the planet right now? Now, under this belief system, for many years, men had access to children, but they did not have to raise them. And for centuries, even though men never raised children, especially on the scale that women have, when they finally entered that conversation, what did we get? We got parenting manuals by men who would never raise children themselves, which basically dismissed the mother's love and instincts, and even promoted harmful ideas like separating babies from an early time and also neglecting them and ignoring them when they cry. This was treated as science, even though it's basically the patriarchy cloaked as expertise. And we've got to remember that for centuries and centuries and centuries, women raised children. Men could keep a very good distance away from childcare responsibilities because they centered themselves in society. So it's kind of just a bit of a given. If the patriarchy centered men and was very male-centric, then naturally, if they're not going to care about women, and see them as full human beings, they're not going to care about children. Children, unfortunately, are going to be the last thing they care about, especially because they are not raising them. They're not with them enough to even care. That's not to say women didn't care either. There was a lot of women who would have cared about children's well-being, but unfortunately, living under the patriarchy, eventually it would have just erased that level of care. And unfortunately, a consequence of this meant for generations, children were actively discouraged to be children. The phrase children should be seen and not heard silenced millions of joyful, curious, noisy kids. And here's what the patriarchy got completely wrong and completely misses, is that children's behaviour is feedback. And I would say that's turned the world, if not societies, into very toxic places. When you decenter children, you are removing a very vital part of the community to be able to reflect on things that may need changing to make things better for everyone. And when you make a society very adult-centric, but mostly for men, it isn't child-centric at all, and the consequences of that are diabolical. Children are so vital to reflect what local communities need and what society as a whole needs to thrive better, to make it better and fair for everyone. And yet, when you focus so much on this male entitlement through the patriarchy, you completely ignore the key element in order to make things fair. Now, I would argue the patriarchy clearly was never set up to make things fair, of course, but I'm just saying over time, when we've shifted a little bit more into being child-centered, this is what one of the consequences is. And I'm not going to say that all of today's problems or historical issues that we've had in society would have been solved if we just continued to be child-centric. But at the same time, a little bit of me is like, we probably would have, because if you really think about it anyway, why would we want to have battles and wars and conflict and genocide if it was going to affect children? If they were going to be the centre of a society, why? Why would you want to have that much bloodshed? You wouldn't, would you? But when you centre men and the patriarchy enters the chat, the last thing you want to care about is children, unfortunately. And then the flip side of having bloodshed everywhere and lots of human loss and death is you then think, okay, let's bring the women back in. Let's bring that property back over here. Get the next part of the property that we need to continue society. It's crazy. You can't even make this stuff up. Like, part of me is just like, oh my God, like, what sort of timeline am I living in here? So if it's always been that way, we could then argue it has clearly shifted from a lot of that. But what has caused that shift? Why has it shifted at all? And I would say the answer is women, the liberation of women. Over the last 100 years or so, as women fought for their rights, respect and recognition, the treatment towards children began to change too. And this is because women and children's treatment has always been intertwined. When women were no longer seen as property, children were then seen as individuals too. We need to understand how interconnected this is. We need to understand that when the patriarchy inserted itself and centered men and children were displaced out the center, women were first also displaced, then children were pushed back further, and now women have come back forward to center themselves. Children have also followed suit. Not on their own, of course, and this is what's really interesting, is most of it is being driven by women. So yes, today we have adopted some child-centric elements and we are still pushing for that in a lot of spaces too, but make no mistake, we are still very adult-centric. Children are still seen and treated as second class in lots of parts of the world, even in more progressive parts of the world. They are still not seen as full little human beings. There is so much childism that happens in society, and to the point that there's a denial about it too. There is so much going on in the world. I mean, just alone wars and conflicts and genocide is enough for me to go, yeah, we've got a long way to go until we can center children again in society, because I personally think a lot of the time that children aren't centered in society just reflects how little we care and want to listen to women in general, because typically the first person who's ever going to speak out for children are going to be women because they're with them the most. Children are still treated as second class, even in the more progressive countries. And I think it's just purely down to the fact that, well, it's just a nasty leftover from historical eras of the patriarchy. And I also do think it's down to misogyny as well, because I think if you don't want to believe or listen to women and value them in society, yet again, you are not going to value or care for children on a level that you think helps them be more of an active participant of society. And I don't think that was the true reason for the patriarchy. I think it was just they just kind of kicked children out because they could see they were the centre of society, and men just inserted themselves to be the centre of society, for society to benefit them the most for so long. And I think a major consequence of this anyway is we've just ended up having so many dysregulated adults because we've decentered children from society. So we've been missing a lot of marks on how to progress healthily as a society. And yeah, I just do think a lot of our issues that we continue to have just stems from the fact that we are not child-centered. Because like I say, their behavior reflects, it's feedback for so much in society on so many levels. And yet we seem to prioritize capitalism and patriarchy so much. We've also devalued women in society very badly. And a consequence of that is also children being devalued still. And it just baffles me because, well, I know why we're probably not still centering children. I think we're purposely not doing it now more than anything. And I think probably because once you start looking at the problems that children are having and showing us, then it goes to show how badly set up our societies are. But yeah, the patriarchy never saw women and children as full human beings. So we've got to remember that. And once you don't see these groups of people as full human beings, then why would you ever progress society based on them? The default is not them anymore. So therefore, the rest of society just has to make do with centering themselves around the one person it was created for. But yeah, the patriarchy never saw women and children as full human beings. And until we unravel that, we're going to keep repeating the same mistakes over and over again. And to me, the answer is right in front of us, is just centralising children in society way more than what we're doing. Humans are meant to be communal people. We're supposed to live in good communities. But unfortunately, when you have a system like the patriarchy, yeah, a lot of consequences come from it. A lot of it does. If anything, just like women's healthcare, once you've centred the man as a default human being, women's healthcare gets neglected. And that's exactly what I'm trying to say has happened to children in society as well. They got decentered to the point where we never looked at children as people, and we only in the past 100 odd years did we decide to fully study children properly. And that's why there's also been a shift in how we view and treat children a lot better. But a lot of people are still holding on to this old traditional approach and perspective on how we treat children. So I hope this video makes sense, because I am very hot and I've just also filmed another video and I really need to go eat my pizza, which is downstairs. So I'm going to wrap this one up. If you did enjoy today's video, please drop a comment down below. I would love to hear your thoughts on this topic in particular. And also please don't forget to like this video. And if you haven't already, please don't forget to subscribe to my channel if you'd like to see more content like this from me.